Hi, my name is Brad Alge, and I am the academic director of the Larsen Leaders Academy at Purdue University's Daniels School of Business. And it is my honor and a privilege to be sitting today with Marshall Larsen. Marshall is the former CEO of Fortune 500 Goodrich Corporation and the inspiration and founder of the Larsen Leaders Academy. So Marshall, thank you for being here today. Greatly appreciate your time.
My pleasure, Brad.
Great. We're going to just talk a little bit about leadership today, but I thought it would be good to start out by you talking a little bit about how you became CEO. I know a lot of people wonder, what does it take to become a CEO? Can you kind of walk us through that progression and how that position evolved, that you found yourself in that chair?
Certainly, when I graduated from West Point, I never ever gave a thought of being CEO. I was thinking, well, I'm going into the Army, which I did for 6 years, and then decided to make a career change, and that brought me here to Purdue University and the Krannert program for getting a MSIA. And when I needed that because I had a lot of leadership training in West Point and in the Army, but nothing business. I didn't know marketing from manufacturing when I walked into the Krannert. And fortunately, when I walked out, I knew a lot more, and Goodrich hired me and started in the financial area for about 4 or 5 years, and quickly came to the conclusion that I didn't want to stay in the financial area. I didn't want to be a CFO. I wanted to run businesses because that's what I'd done in the Army. I'd run small units. And so I switched over into marketing in our tire group, and after a couple years in that, which I enjoyed dealing with the customers, I had the opportunity to become vice president of our Canadian operations up in north of Toronto, and that would have been the first opportunity to really run a pretty good sized business. And Susan and I went up there to look around and talk to the guy that was running it, who wanted to get back to the States, and his wife. And after a weekend there, it became abundantly clear my wife did not want to live there. And we had a few discussions about that, and back to Ohio, to the headquarters, and I had to go in and tell the president of the tire group I wasn't going to take the job, which I really wanted the job. But the family's got to be happy too. Fortunately, that didn't derail my career. I thought it might, but within a year I became assistant to the president of the entire company. And he gave me also, at the same time, doing the assistant job, a small business in our aerospace division to run. And that really excited me. And I ended up running a series of different progressively larger businesses at Goodrich Aerospace before I became president of the entire aerospace division in '95. And that was probably the first time, Brad, that I ever thought I might have a chance to be CEO, because I became one of the top 5 people in the company at that point. But this didn't happen overnight. This happened, over 25 years. Right. So it's not a quick fix to go from graduating from Krannert straight into a CEO job. But I got that opportunity a few years later and spent 9 years at the helm. And I have to tell you that it was one of the most rewarding times of my career. Great team, great people, and we really did well.
Yeah, that's a great story. The turning down the Canadian business opportunity is what I like to call, oftentimes use the term CLM, a career limiting move. And
that's what I thought.
It wasn't something that you necessarily wanted to do. Turned out it wasn't a limiting move, and it does speak to the importance of having that support and balance and kind of...
And my wife doesn't let me forget it.
It's the best decision you've ever made, Marshall.
Exactly.
Well, you made one good decision in our view, and that was to sort of start the Larsen Leaders Academy. Mm-hmm. why did you start it, and kind of what did you envision it to be when you did start it?
Well, when I didn't get back to Purdue for a long time after I graduated. I take that back. I came here on recruiting trips to get Purdue graduates to come to Goodrich, but I wasn't actively involved. And it wasn't till I really got involved in the Dean's Advisory Council and started seeing what was going on here on campus with the business school. And Susan and I decided we weren't contributing, but we weren't doing anything, I think, that was making a major difference. And so 6 years ago, almost 7 years ago, the dean at the time, Dave Hummels, and I sat down in his conference room and started a little brainstorming, and he helped me come to the conclusion that we could really do something to make a difference. And that turned into Larsen Leaders Academy. And Susan and I were very fortunate in our career that we had the wherewithal to fund it. And we did fund it initially for about 3 or 4 years to see how it was going to go. And then eventually we endowed it because we have so enjoyed dealing with these young people. I mean, you get to do it every day.
I know.
And it's one of these things where you come back to campus and you see them. They're fabulous, fabulous young people.
Yeah, yeah. You know, and I joined as the academic director probably three or 4 years ago, and it has been really a boost to my career and sort of sense of purpose. We have 400 students for today in the Larsen Leaders Academy, and they're going to go out there and do great things. I have no doubt about that. Let's talk a little bit about leadership, and I'd like to maybe just start with your overall leadership philosophy. How do you define leadership? What is your philosophy on it, and your own style that's worked for you in your career?
Well, I would not classify myself as a charismatic leader. I would classify myself as an enabler. Enable the people in your organization to do their best. And I found that the better culture that we instilled in the organization, and teamwork and ethics and, all pulling the same way for the better of the whole company, the better we did. And these people rose to the occasion. We had in Goodrich, we call it the 95-5 rule.
Okay.
And our philosophy was, and our people philosophy was, that 95% of the people came to work every day wanting to do the right thing. I don't even think it was 5% that came that didn't. It might have been 2. But those people were weeded out, not by me, by the rest of the people on their team, because they wanted people to pull together. And so we ended up with this culture of we can do it and helping each other.
Right.
And I think that allowed us to really develop leaders.
Right.
This people philosophy evolved into one of our programs called Edge. I think it was Executive Development for Goodrich Excellence. And we would pick 20 mid-level managers across the company, and we divide them into 5-person teams, men, women, from all walks, and they would get real life problems that were occurring at Goodrich. The best example I can think of is we had bid on the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, and we had a number of systems on it, and we built a new plant in Mexicali, Mexico, just across the border. And if you know anything about the Dreamliner, it was delayed probably 3 or 4 years. So you got this infrastructure and these people sitting there not producing anything. And so we gave this problem to these teams, and they came up with some really innovative ways of utilizing that plant before we had the 787 there. And they saved us a lot of money and actually brought in revenue. I mean, these aren't senior leaders in the company, they're mid-level managers.
They bought you time, basically,
Yes,
until the
absolutely.
Dreamliner got to kick off.
Absolutely, and we had lots of projects like that because we had a new 20 people every year.
Yeah.
And then they were given almost the entire year to work on this because they were all from all over the country and the world. And they had to do, it was before we had Zoom. And so they had to get together every once in a while and try to put this thing together. And at the culmination, I and my staff sat in on their presentations. So they presented to me, the CEO, and my 6 staff members, and they were really impressive, really did a tremendous job. And that singled them out.
Yeah.
As we got to watch these people because they can rise up.
Yeah. So that helped you identify
Yeah.
who those leaders are.
And the second thing we did was had what was called a talent management program. When I took over as CEO, my predecessor had everything so decentralized in the company that we had like 10 business units, and everyone did their own hiring, their own development within it, their own HR, all of this. As CEO, I couldn't look out there and see where the talent was. Right. So I changed it, I centralized it, and I took this lady, Jennifer Polino,
yes.
who was running our, at the time, I don't know, about $600-700 million wheel and brake business, and I convinced her to become the head of HR. She developed this talent management program with her people, and we would have about 3 times a year reviews, and we would go business unit by business unit, and we would figure out who were the best people, where should they be next. Because if you don't do that, the tendency of the local manager is to keep those people, never give them a chance to go outside.
That's right.
And so that made a huge difference in getting the right people in the right places. So when you talk about leadership, it's more than just standing up in front of the crowd and telling them which direction to go.
Yeah. Yeah, and finding those right people. I mean, I think Lincoln said, you got to keep searching till you find your next grant. And as a leader,
Right.
Identifying those people becomes so important.
In fact, I would say probably I can name 5 or 6 that after I left the company and retired, they ended up becoming CEOs elsewhere.
And it's probably, at least in part, and I'm sure they would say this, that culture that you built prepared them.
Yeah. In fact, one company, Triumph Aerospace, I happened to know Dan Crowley, the CEO. He invited me to speak at their offsite because he had hired about 10 Goodrich people after the United Technologies Goodrich merger. And they kept pitching the whole culture thing. And so he asked me to come in and explain the whole thing to his people.
Well, in leadership roles, it's rare that you get through a tenure such as yours and not having made some mistake or experienced some sort of failure or adversity. Can you share with me a little, maybe an example of a mistake or a failure or adversity that you've had to deal with, and how you dealt with that, and maybe how it made you a better leader?
I don't know if you call it a failure or not enough vision to predict what could happen. When 9/11 happened, I had to lay off 20% of our workforce. And that was probably at the time 5,000 people.
Right.
And I vowed I would never do that again. But you don't know when these kinds of events are going to happen. Usually they're not that precipitous because all of a sudden airlines weren't flying after 9/11, the government wasn't buying anything, and it was, our revenues took a plunge, and we just couldn't afford the size of the workforce we had. So over time, the next 6-7 years, we were growing after things kind of came back together, and we got to the January, I think it was '08, and I had 250 of our top people together, which I did every January to kick the year off. And I stood up there and said, I want you to stop hiring. And everyone had been hiring because we were growing. And it made sense to hire. And they looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, I've never seen an aerospace cycle go this long before we have a downturn. And history says it's, you know, it starts up and it builds like that, and then all of a sudden it comes way down.
It's very sort of cyclical over
Yes,
time.
very cyclical. And we had had a long rise, and I said, I've never seen an aerospace cycle without a cycle. And, and we're going to stop hiring right now because I am not going to have a mass layoff.
Yeah.
Well, it was the right decision for the wrong reason.
Okay.
What happened was that the '08 financial crisis hit. You remember that.
Oh, yeah.
And we would have had to lay off a lot of people if we'd have continued hiring, but we didn't have to lay anyone off. A lot of companies did.
Right.
We just didn't, you know, we caught it before we had too many people coming on board.
Yeah.
And so it was a good decision for the wrong reason.
Well, and maybe part of the lesson there is, you know, inaction sometimes can paralyze you.
Yes.
You know, you can sit there, and I've experienced this, you know, you get into this sort of analysis paralysis where you're looking for all kinds of data and information and you never make a decision. And sometimes
Exactly.
you have to make those decisions and then say, okay, what's the result and how do we respond to that? So it sounds like worked out. You know, the culture thing, it had to help the culture when you said, we're not going to lay anybody off during this downtime. Imagine it was a little bit of a challenge earlier when you had the 5,000 that you had to kind of, you know, let go. Those survivors, those who stayed, probably, you know, are like, am I next?
The other thing we did between 9/11 and the financial crisis is we had embraced the Toyota manufacturing system.
Okay.
And so we were becoming more and more efficient. And if you want to get the best out of your workforce, you can't lay them off when they show you the way to use 50% less labor in a process.
Right, right.
You know, you've got to reassign them. And so
When
they
you
don't
think,
lose.
well, and think about the knowledge. If you let them walk out the door, they're taking that knowledge and they're not
Exactly.
keeping it, you know, in their pocket. They're going
Right.
to work for your competitor.
And these people on the factory floor knew one heck of a lot more about where we could save than managers did.
Right.
And so if you enabled them, man, they were good.
And that ties back to your leadership philosophy of enablement.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's shift gears just a little bit. Think about maybe a leader could be someone you look to now, a contemporary leader, or perhaps even someone in history or in the past. What's a leader you admire and have looked up to or maybe tried to learn from over the years?
Well, I never got to meet this individual, Dwight Eisenhower, but obviously he rose from a very humble beginning in Kansas, spent 20 plus years in the Army after graduating from West Point, and he never got beyond Lieutenant Colonel, which is the first 4 grades. Probably wasn't even thinking about becoming a general. And then World War II hit. And George C. Marshall, who at the time was the Chief of Staff of the Army, picked him to be the Supreme Commander. And he had to make some awfully tough decisions. D-Day was the toughest. And I don't know if you know this, but he wrote 2 letters just before D-Day. One was if they were successful, and one was he was going to resign if they failed and take the blame. Fortunately, they were successful. And then back to being humble. You know, military officers didn't make a lot of money back then. So you think of someone having command millions of troops in a major conflict. At the end of the war, he got out of the military and his next job was the president of Columbia University. So he doesn't own a car or anything. He's been driven around for his entire career.
Right.
He goes out and buys a car, brings it back out in front of the Columbia presidential house, asks Mamie, his wife, to come out. And he says, "Mamie, this is our life savings." And he was right. I mean, it took their life savings to buy that car.
Right.
Now, he didn't know he was going to become president of the United States and so on, but
Let's say he wasn't in it for the money.
he wasn't in it for the money, no.
Right.
And then I don't think he was in the presidency for the money, although he did well after it. But he had 2 terms. He was, I'm sorry, I skipped one thing in World War II that I think was very important. When they freed up the concentration camps, he called in all the people like you with their cameras and said, "I want this recorded for posterity." And he was right. Otherwise, people forget. A generation goes by, and they forget what really took place there.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Marshall, because one of the things we're trying to do at the Larsen Leader Academy is put our students in situations where they can not only understand sort of the X's and O's of the situation, but the sort of emotional impact. And so we have immersion learning experiences where we go to Gettysburg every year. This spring, we're taking Larsen students to Normandy,
Right.
of course, D-Day. Eisenhower's boyhood home, or not boyhood home, no, Eisenhower's retirement home is in Gettysburg, and he used to host, I think a lot of West Point come down to Gettysburg for staff rides. It's when you're there and you get a chance to sort of see the battlefield and see the experience that they had. We think that that's something that our students will be inspired by, and it wouldn't be possible without your support. So yeah, thank you. Well, we've talked a little bit about this, but I'll see if you have anything you want to add. You've kind of talked about difficult decisions. Certainly, Eisenhower had a difficult decision to make. With the invasion, he knew people were going to lose lives.
Right.
The downsizing. Is there any other sort of difficult decisions or advice you have for people who maybe have to make a difficult decision?
Well, hopefully you are in an ethical organization, because you want to do the right thing. And sometimes the right thing may not be something that's going to further your career. It may be something contrary to what your superiors want to do. I had one example of that mid-career. I was running our aircraft tire business, and I took it over without having been able to develop the budget myself. The previous general manager left, and it wasn't a big business. It was about $45 million in revenue and about $3.2 million operating income budget for the coming year. And I brought my controller with me from my previous business. And we got in there. First month, we lost $1 million. We're thinking, what's going on here? The second month, we lost another $1 million. We started really digging in, trying to figure this out. And we looked at it and we did a forecast. It came to the conclusion the best we could do, even becoming more efficient, was to lose about $5 to $6 million for the entire year. Now, I had a boss that wouldn't believe that. He'd been in charge of that business under the previous, or with the previous general manager, whom he fired. And he and I really disagreed on what could be done. And he went to the president of aerospace, who I had worked for in my previous job, and said, Marshall's a Boy Scout. He's given us the worst case scenario and all this. And I went to him too and explained what I thought. And then my controller and I discovered that they had moved the aircraft tire business from Akron, Ohio, down to a plant in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought, well, how can the financials be so different from one location to the other? Because up in Ohio, they were making money. Well, we found out they were the landlord of the complex there for 4 or 5 businesses, and they were over allocating their own costs to the other businesses,
Mm-hmm.
which is totally unethical.
They're hiding the cost.
Hiding the costs. And I brought that up, my controller and I, both of us thought we were going to get fired.
Right.
I went home and told Susan, I don't think I'm long here to stay, because you don't usually buck your boss and get away with it.
Another CLM, career limiting move.
Exactly.
Potentially.
Exactly.
Potentially.
And what happened was the president of aerospace, whom I'd worked for before, brought in the auditors. And they discovered the same thing my controller and I had discovered. My boss got fired, the controller of aerospace got fired,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I was okay.
So that's interesting because, you know, having been in various roles, you know, as a leader, you got people underneath you, but sometimes the challenge is leading up
Mm-hmm.
and how you manage up. And it sounds like one of the lessons is to, you know, state your case.
Right.
Are there other things that helped in sort of influencing up? Because you don't have the formal power, you know, the legitimate power. You got to rely on other things.
There are good ways to lead up, and there are bad ways. The bad ways, you lead up, but you don't pay any attention to the people below you. I've seen that, and long-term people don't succeed
No.
that way, because eventually they get caught up in not getting the job done. I mean, you got to develop a good relationship with your boss and other superiors, and always be willing to help the company. You build a reputation. It can't start from, you know, you can't say you're wrong from day one,
Yeah.
unless it's an ethical issue. That's different.
Right.
But if it's just a business issue, you can differ. And if it's a business issue and you've said, no, we should go do this, and your boss says, no, this is what we need to do, and he's got many years' experience on you, you got to think hard about that and try to understand his position. It's not so much leading up as just understanding up.
Yeah, there might be a lot of black holes, things you don't see that are seen from that
Exactly.
chair. Yeah, for sure. Interesting. Well, I want to come back to a topic was touched on a little bit earlier, you know, and that is this idea of succession planning and building leaders from within. What were some of the things you had done to sort of prepare people in your organization to sort of assume higher and higher roles within the organization, and even maybe fulfill your shoes? I mean, I often talk to my students that say, you know, one of the best indicators of a good leader is, have you made your role obsolete? In other words, they're prepared now to take over for
Right.
you. What can you share about leadership succession at Goodrich and your experience?
Obviously, lower down in the organization, we made sure we would get people varied experiences. You know, you go from running this kind of business to this one. In other words, this one's all mechanical, this one's electronic, this one's smaller, this one's larger, this one has different customers. When I got to the point where we were really seriously looking at my successor, because we had a hard and fast rule in the company that the CEO must retire at age 65.
Okay.
And so as I got to be 59, 60 years old, we got a lot more serious about finding someone. We had people that we thought, and it's the hit by the bus scenario. You know, if I all of a sudden was disabled, who would you put in there?
Right, right.
But you'd rather do it in an orderly transition. So it ended up, I had 3 people, a woman and 2 men, that really divided up all the revenues in businesses within the company. And they were all people who could possibly succeed me. And so I made sure they got different kinds of experiences. For instance, I had the woman be our representative on the General Aviation Manufacturers Association, so she got outside experience. I had them all participate in Wall Street analyst meetings, so they got used to how do you deal with Wall Street, how do you deal with this quarterly earnings thing, how do you deal with forecasts, how do you answer questions, like you don't have to answer every question an analyst asks you.
Right.
Because some of them, you're going to divulge something to them that you didn't divulge, and then you got to make a press release.
Right.
But tried to give them lots of different experiences and stand up in front of the board of directors and present about their business or some other topic they've asked. Made sure that they, at dinners, that I'd salt them around the different board members. So when we would have the discussion with the independent directors, with me and none of my management in the room, we could talk about each one of them. And they could talk about their experiences with that person. So that by the time when we were acquired by United Technologies when I was 64 years old, the year before I would have had to retire, we had a pretty darn good idea which one was going to rise to the top. And in fact, he took a senior position with United after we merged and then left and became a CEO.
Yeah, so he was ready.
Yeah. So it's, some people they send them through testing and all that. I didn't think we needed to do that because we'd see them every day, dealing with their business, dealing with our customers, and dealing with Wall Street, dealing with the government. Lots of different aspects, to being a CEO.
Intentional sort of exposing them to different challenges.
Absolutely, yeah. And so what happened is they're going to differentiate themselves.
Right.
You're not going to make a blind pick just because I like Brad better than the other two, so I'm going to pick him.
Yeah. No, it doesn't quite work that way. I'm glad you like me. What would you say to the young aspiring leaders, many of, like, for example, our young adults here in the Larsen Leaders Academy here at Purdue that really haven't cut their teeth out in the real world too much yet? What advice would you share with them based on sort of your own career and as they move forward?
Well, certainly they participate in Larsen Leader in the different programs you've described, the TREX, the Executive Council, all of those special programs and, internships and taking leadership positions. They're going to be so much better prepared by the time they go to a company. I knew a lot about how to work as a team, but not as much about a business team. And these kids will know that. But once they get in the company, they have to differentiate themselves.
Right.
And it isn't about always making yourself look better than the next person. It's being willing to help.
Right.
It's being willing to be a really good team member. It's being willing to work hard, take on assignments that maybe are pretty darn difficult, but don't shy away from them. Find a mentor as soon as you can. And it takes a while once you walk into a company. Some of the people who have taken internships and then go with that company already know some pretty good people that could be their mentor. Right. You don't need just one. No. I made that mistake of not doing it early in my career, business career. It would have been, I think, much better. I would have kind of had a better feel about how to go about different aspects of business.
Was that intentional or just, naivete at the time?
For me, it was naivete.
Yeah.
I mean, it probably took me over 5 years into the company before I started realizing a lot of that stuff. And realized there were people in that company that could help me and were willing to take the time.
Well, listen, Marshall, I really greatly appreciate your time. Is there anything else you'd like to share about the your leadership journey or the Larsen Leader Academy before we conclude?
The only thing I would say is, and you know this, we can't kind of rest on our laurels. We got to keep improving. And in fact, today we're going to be sitting down and looking at the next 5 years.
That's right.
What might it bring? What do we need to do differently? How can we improve it? Are some of the things we're doing still necessary?
Yeah.
I don't know those answers, but I got people like you to sit down and help me kind of think through it.
Well, and I think that, when you think about continuous improvement, the way we translate that too is sort of, continuous learning. What can we learn? Not only in terms of applied leadership, so it's what can we learn about the things we've done well and what have we not done well, and let's try to continue to grow, continue to get better. You can always get better.